You ever feel like your life's fine, like really fine, but something's missing? That's been me. I mean, Ryan's a good man. He works his butt off overseas to take care of us. He calls every night when he can, he sends gifts for the kids, and every 6 months, he comes home for 2 short weeks. I know I'm lucky, but still, it's lonely, you know? There's only so much you can get from a voice on the phone or a text saying, "Love you, babe." It's not the same as him being here, holding me, making me feel wanted. The kids keep me busy, of course. Between school, soccer practice, and their endless energy, there's always something to do. And I've got my hobbies, knitting mostly, though I've been baking a lot too. It helps keep the house smelling warm and full, even when it feels like there's a big, empty hole in it. But at night? God, the nights are the worst. I miss him so much. His laugh, his stupid jokes, the way he'd kiss my forehead while I cooked dinner. I miss sleeping next to someone, you know? And no matter how many pillows I stuff on his side of the bed, it's just not the same. So a couple of months ago, I started volunteering at the community center. Figured it'd be good to get out of the house, meet people, and maybe feel a little less stuck in my own head. That's where I met Jake. And listen, before you say anything, I didn't even notice him at first. He's just this young guy, probably mid-20s, with this messy, boyish charm about him. But he's funny, like, laugh out loud, roll your eyes funny. The first time we really talked, we were unpacking some donation boxes together. He made some joke about how half the shoes people donate should have been thrown out 10 years ago, and I laughed so hard I snorted. He looked at me and said, "You've got the best laugh." And the way he said it, like he meant it. I don't even remember the last time someone said something like that to me. At first, I thought it was nothing, just a young guy being nice. But then every time I saw him, he'd make a point to ask how I was doing, really ask and listen like he actually cared. That's rare, you know? Especially when most of my days are spent talking to kids who only half hear me when I tell them to clean their rooms. One night after volunteering, Jake offered to walk me to my car. It was one of those perfect evenings, warm but not too hot, the sky all pink and gold. We stood there talking, just laughing about the day, when he reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear. I don't even know why it caught me off guard. It was such a simple thing, but my heart started racing like I was some teenager with a crush. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You deserve someone who makes you feel special every day." I froze. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. And then, before I could overthink it, he kissed me. It wasn't one of those dramatic, movie scene kisses. It was soft, careful, like he was testing the waters. But, oh my God, it lit me up. I hadn't felt that kind of spark in years. When it ended, I didn't know what to do. My brain was screaming, "What are you doing?" But my heart was begging me not to walk away. That night, I barely slept. I just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over. The way his hand had felt on my cheek. The way he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world. And I kept asking myself, is this really what you want, Anna? Is this who you are now? A few days later, Jake asked if I wanted to grab coffee. Harmless, right? Just coffee. That's what I kept telling myself. But when I got to the cafe, he smiled at me like I was the highlight of his day, and suddenly, coffee wasn't enough. We walked for a while, talking and laughing like we always did, and when the sun started setting, he asked if we could keep talking somewhere more private. Before I knew it, we were checking into a motel just off the highway. It was one of those places with flickering neon signs and curtains that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, but I didn't care. It wasn't about where we were, it was about him. About the way he looked at me, the way he touched me, the way he made me feel seen. That night was, God, it was everything I didn't realize I'd been missing. He didn't just make me feel wanted. He made me feel alive. For the first time in forever, I wasn't just a wife waiting by the phone or a mom juggling schedules. I was me again. And for those few hours, the weight of all the shoulds and what-ifs disappeared. But when the sun came up and I saw the motel's dingy walls in the daylight, reality hit me hard. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the old carpet, my head spinning with guilt and confusion. I told Jake I needed to go, and he didn't push, just gave me that soft smile and said he'd see me when I was ready. I drove home in silence, my heart heavy, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I wish I could say that night at the motel was a one-time thing, that I came to my senses and went back to being the faithful wife waiting for her husband to come home. But life's not that simple, is it? After that night, I told myself I couldn't see Jake again. I had Ryan, the kids, I had a good life. I told myself that over and over, but the pull was too strong. Jake was magnetic. He had this way of making me feel like the only woman in the room, like nothing else mattered except that moment. And I think that's what I needed more than anything, not just to be loved, but to be needed. Ryan loves me, I know he does, but when someone's halfway across the world, it's easy to feel like you're just part of a checklist. Jake didn't make me feel like that. He made me feel alive, important, and maybe even a little bit reckless. At first, I was careful. We kept things low-key, grabbing coffee, sneaking quick conversations after our volunteer shifts. But one meeting turned into 2, then 3, and soon we were finding reasons to see each other every day. We'd meet up after I dropped the kids off at school, or on the weekends when they were at their friends' houses. Sometimes it was just for an hour, sometimes longer. And every time, I told myself it'd be the last. Every time, I knew it wouldn't be. Jake and I fell into this rhythm that felt like its own little world, separate from everything else. He'd text me first thing in the morning, something simple like, "Hope you have a great day, smiley face." And I'd catch myself smiling at my phone like a teenager. We'd meet up, and he'd always ask about my day, about the kids, about things no one else ever seemed to notice. And when he kissed me, it felt like every worry, every doubt, just melted away. But living a double life? It takes its toll. At first, I thought I could manage it, like I could keep my world with Jake and my life with Ryan completely separate. But the guilt started creeping in. Every time Ryan called, I'd feel this knot in my stomach. I'd listen to him talk about his job, his plans for when he came home, and I'd feel like a fraud. How could I smile and say, "I love you," when I'd just spent the afternoon in Jake's arms? And then there were the close calls. One time, I accidentally left my phone out, and one of the kids almost saw a text from Jake. My heart nearly stopped. Another time, one of the neighbors saw me getting into Jake's car. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at me, I couldn't shake it. Every day, I felt like I was walking a tightrope, and any wrong step would send everything crashing down. But even with the guilt, even with the fear, I couldn't stop. Jake had become this escape for me, this bright, burning thing I couldn't give up. And the more time we spent together, the harder it was to imagine going back to the way things were before. And now, here I am, 6 months into this thing I never thought I'd start, torn between 2 lives I don't know how to untangle. Ryan's coming home in a couple of weeks, and I'm terrified. Terrified of what he'll see when he looks at me, of whether I can still be the woman he left behind. But I'm also terrified of what it means to let Jake go, of whether I'll lose this piece of myself I've only just started to find. When I missed my period, I told myself it was nothing. I'd been under so much stress lately, taking care of the kids, juggling the house, missing Ryan, and of course, everything with Jake. Stress could mess with your body, right? That's all it was. But then the days kept slipping by, and a sinking feeling settled in my chest. I started noticing little things, how tired I felt, how I couldn't stomach my morning coffee, how emotional I'd been over the smallest things. Deep down, I knew. Still, when I took the test, I wasn't prepared for the answer. That tiny little plus sign felt like it was screaming at me, and I couldn't stop staring at it. Pregnant. For a long time, I just sat there on the bathroom floor, staring at the test in my hand. My mind was racing in every direction. What would this mean? How could I tell Ryan? How could I tell Jake? And worst of all, I didn't know who the father was. I knew I needed to talk to Jake. He deserved to know. And as much as I didn't want to face it, we had to figure out what to do next. When he suggested meeting at his apartment, I hesitated at first. I'd never been there before. We always met at the cafe, the park, or motels when things went further. But I figured if we were going to have this conversation, it might as well be somewhere private. When I walked into Jake's apartment for the first time, I was struck by how lived in it felt. It was small and a little cluttered, with books piled on the coffee table and sketches tacked up on the walls. It was the kind of space that felt warm, like someone's personality had spilled into every corner. I sat down on the couch, clutching my bag like it was a lifeline. Jake could tell I was nervous. He sat across from me, leaning forward, his brows furrowed with concern. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, even though my heart was pounding. "We need to talk, Jake. There's something I need to tell you." But before I could say anything else, my eyes drifted to the wall behind him. That's when I saw them. The photos. There were dozens of them, framed and hung in a neat row. At first, I just saw Jake's smiling face in a bunch of them, standing next to different people. But then one photo caught my eye, and my heart stopped. It was Ryan. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. I thought I was imagining it, but as my eyes scanned the wall, I saw him again and again, standing next to Jake, their arms slung over each other's shoulders, laughing like brothers. "Jake," I said, my voice shaking. Who is this?" He turned to look, his expression casual. "Oh, that's my brother, Ryan," he said, smiling. "He's been living in Europe for a while now." I stared at him, my stomach twisting into knots. "Your brother?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. He's got a wife and a kid over there. Pretty settled, I guess. We don't talk as much as we used to, but we're still close." I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me as the truth crashed down like a ton of bricks. Jake's brother wasn't just anyone. Jake's brother was Ryan. My husband. I laughed, this broken, desperate sound that didn't even feel like it was coming from me. "Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling, "Ryan isn't just your brother. He's my husband." The color drained from Jake's face. "What?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I could barely look at him. My hands were trembling, and my chest felt like it was caving in. Not only had I been having an affair, but I was pregnant. And the baby was Jake's. There was no question about it. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, both of us reeling from the impossible mess we'd found ourselves in. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice soft and filled with worry. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. How could I? The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Now, we had to figure out what came next for Jake, for Ryan, for the kids, and for the baby. For days after that bombshell, I couldn't think straight. My head was spinning with everything: Ryan, Jake, the baby. The sheer weight of it all felt impossible. I didn't sleep much, just laid in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision I'd made over the last 6 months. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jake had said. Ryan has a wife and kid in Europe. How could Ryan betray me like that? After everything we'd been through, all the years I'd waited for him, raising our kids practically on my own while he was halfway around the world. And then there was Jake. Sweet, impulsive Jake. He'd been there for me when I felt like I was disappearing, but he wasn't the answer. He was too young, and as much as it pained me to admit, he wasn't ready to step into a life like mine. And the baby? God, the baby. I couldn't even wrap my head around what that meant yet. All I knew was that I couldn't stay frozen in this mess forever. I decided I needed answers, so I called Ryan. It was early morning here, but late evening in Europe. He picked up after the second ring, his voice warm and familiar, completely oblivious to the storm raging on my end of a line. "Anna, hey," he said, sounding genuinely happy to hear from me. "What's going on? Everything okay?" "Ryan," I said, my voice trembling, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause, and I could almost hear his mood shift. "Of course. What is it?" I took a deep breath, gripping the phone tightly. "Do you have a family in Europe? A wife? A child?" The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched on for so long I thought the call had dropped, but then I heard him sigh. Anna, I can explain. I hung up. I didn't need an explanation. I already knew the truth. A few days later, I met Jake at a park, neutral ground. I had to tell him what I'd decided. He deserved that much. He looked worried when he saw me, his hands shoved into his pockets like he was bracing himself for bad news. Hey, he said softly. You okay? I nodded, though my heart felt like it might crack in two. Jake, I've been doing a lot of thinking. He looked down, already knowing what was coming. And I think it's best if we stop seeing each other. You've been amazing, and I'll always be grateful for the way you've been there for me, but this isn't something we can build a life on. You're young. You have your whole future ahead of you. And I have the kids, and I hesitated, pressing a hand to my stomach. And now this. Jake's eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But instead, he just nodded. I get it, he said quietly. I'll always care about you, Anna. You know that, right? I know, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. I care about you too. But it's just too much. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was junk, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was from Ryan's wife. Dear Anna, I don't know how to start this, but I felt like I had to reach out to you. My name is Claire, and I'm married to Ryan. I recently found out about you, and I wanted you to know that I had no idea you existed until now. I don't know what Ryan told you, but I've seen photos of your family, and it's clear you've been in his life for far longer than I have. Ryan lied to both of us. He's been splitting his time between two lives, one with me and our son, and one with you and your children. He travels more than he needs to for work, so he can see you both. I don't know what to do with this information, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. Please know that I had no intention of hurting you or your family. I didn't know. And now, I feel just as lost as I imagine you must feel. Claire. I dropped the letter, my hands shaking. Ryan hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd built an entire second life. And suddenly, everything made sense. The longer work trips, the gifts he'd send to make up for his absence, the way he always seemed just a little too perfect on the phone. My head was spinning. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living in this mess. Ryan had betrayed me in a way I couldn't forgive, and Jake wasn't the answer. It was time to take control of my life, for me, for the kids, and for the baby growing inside me. The letter from Claire was the final crack in the fragile illusion I'd been living in. For days, I couldn't eat or sleep. My emotions swung wildly between fury and despair. But mostly I felt numb. How had I let my life get so far off course? I didn't know what to do, whether to confront Ryan, talk to Jake again, or just disappear. Every option felt impossible. But then something happened that I never expected. It started with a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened it cautiously. Standing on my porch was Claire. She was younger than me, with sleek, dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She didn't look angry or bitter. If anything, she looked sad. Anna, she said softly, her voice trembling. Can I come in? I should have slammed the door in her face. I should have told her to get lost. But instead, I stepped aside, too stunned to argue. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence thick between us. Finally, she spoke. I don't know why I'm here, she admitted, staring down at her hands. I felt like I needed to see you, to talk to you. I folded my arms, unsure of what to say. You've already said a lot, I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. Your letter didn't leave much out. She winced but nodded.
I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. About Ryan? I snapped. Or about the fact that my entire marriage was a lie? Claire looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. Both. As we talked, something unexpected happened. The anger I felt toward her began to fade. It wasn't her fault, not really. She'd been blindsided by Ryan, just like I had. And as we shared stories, piecing together the tangled web of his lies, a strange bond formed between us. We weren't enemies. We were victims. And then Claire said something that changed everything. "Anna," she began hesitantly, "I don't think Ryan's who he says he is. At all." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've started digging into his life. His work, his travel records, everything. And things don't add up." She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "I think he's running from something. Something bigger than just us." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Together, we decided to dig deeper, pooling our knowledge and resources. And what we found turned my world upside down. Ryan wasn't just living a double life. He was involved in something shady, money laundering, maybe worse. His work trips weren't work at all. They were cover-ups for his real dealings. And the worst part? Both Claire and I realized we'd been used, not as wives, but as pawns. He'd been funneling money through both our households, using us to keep up appearances. The gifts, the separate lives, the perfect lies. It was all part of some elaborate scheme. One night, as I was sorting through old bank statements and emails, my doorbell rang. It was Jake. "Anna," he said, his voice serious, "I've been thinking about everything, and I can't just let this go." I sighed, gesturing for him to come in. "Jake, this is so much bigger than you realize." "That's why I'm here," he said, his eyes fierce. "I talked to Ryan." My stomach dropped. "You what?" "He's my brother," Jake said, shrugging. I couldn't just ignore it. "But, Anna, he's running scared. He knows we're onto him." My heart raced. "What did he say?" Jake hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "He gave me this. Said to give it to you." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a one-way plane ticket for me and the kids, along with a note in Ryan's handwriting. "Anna, take the kids and go. Anywhere. You deserve better than me. I'm sorry for everything. No explanation. No closure. Just an apology and an escape route." I didn't take the ticket. Instead, I handed everything we'd uncovered about Ryan over to the authorities. Claire and I worked together, determined to bring him to justice. And Jake? He stood by me through it all, not as a lover, but as an unexpected ally. Ryan disappeared before they could arrest him. To this day, I don't know where he went or what became of him. But in a strange way, his betrayal set me free. I sold the house, moved to a new city with the kids, and started over. The baby, Jake's baby, became a fresh beginning, a reminder that even in the messiest of situations, life has a way of surprising you. And Claire? We stayed in touch. Two women who found an unexpected friendship in the wreckage of their lives. As for Ryan? Well, some stories don't have neat endings.